live session of discussion about those first 2 chapters. And then I'll post those guided reading questions today. You don't have to have them done until Wednesday, but in case you wanted to get a little bit of a head start, I'll post those. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So hopefully that PDF works out for you guys. There's a video posted there for you guys to watch, but other than that, by tomorrow, I think, right? Or by Wednesday, chapters 1 to 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to have them read and have the questions answered by the next live session, so we can talk about it.
It's cool if you guys are able to print it. You can actually highlight directly or write on it if you want to. If you can't print it like me, then you can just read it on the computer.
It's not very long. I think total PDF's 50 pages or something.
Yeah, it's very, very quick. So that'll be nice. And it goes perfectly with what we're learning. So good. Thanks, Miss Tana Miller. Well, thanks everybody who joined. We are going to record this session just so that I can upload the video for anybody who was not able to make it. Just to clarify for you guys, for the live sessions, we will try to tell you pretty far ahead of time, or I guess on Monday or the weekend, when we're going to have live sessions throughout the week so that you guys are able to log in or whatnot. But I want you to know, we're not going to give participation points. It's better probably to be here. That way you can ask questions if you want. But I also don't want you guys to feel stressed. I know some people probably feel stressed with all of the stuff going on, but it is nice to reconnect and see each other face to face, better than watching a video. So with that, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and start presenting about the rise of totalitarianism. So if you guys will grab out your study guides and have a red pen highlighter, just like we do at school, I'll go ahead and we're going to actually start going over totalitarianism, and then we're going to go into Russia. And at 9:30, just like in class, wherever we are, we'll stop, and you'll finish that, the rest of those questions for homework, which I already posted. I think it's up through question number 10 only. So hopefully we'll get a really good chunk of those done, and you won't have too much to do besides what we do right now in class. Okay, so someone who has their mic on, or if you want to turn your mic on, and just share what allows a totalitarian ruler to rise to power. Before we even get started, what conditions, what is the setting or the environment that allows totalitarianism to even happen?
Usually unrest.
Okay, good. There's unrest. What else?
Order. There's no order in the country.
Good. There's a lack of order for sure. Good. The unrest and the lack of order could be in terms of there being actual riots. It could just be economic unrest, right? That people don't have jobs or they're really in debt. Very good. Anything else that kind of allows this to happen? So totalitarianism is the term we use in the 20th century for a concept we already talked about back in the 16th and 17th centuries. Do you guys remember that term? Thinking back to absolutism. So if you remember, we talked about absolutism and what an absolute ruler is. Very similar idea with totalitarian rulers. They're just not monarchs in the same way. Okay, so same idea, right? So remember in the 16th and 17th century, does anyone remember the type of conflict that there was that everybody was fighting about all over?
Religious.
Good. Religious conflict. Exactly. There was a ton of religious conflict and people were killing each other over Protestantism, Catholicism, Christianity. And so a lot of the rulers were able to rise to power because they established order, right? They ended civil unrest because there was a lot of fighting. Okay. So good. So going kind of into that, you guys already wrote this down, but totalitarianism as a term is just a government that takes total centralized state control over every aspect of public and private life. And I put this here purposely because you guys already actually are really familiar with the idea of totalitarianism. From what book?
1984.
1984. So you guys already read it. I really want you to kind of go back to this summer, go back to when you read this book and when we talked about it in the fall, because so many of the things we're going to talk about right now are connected and show up in that book. Because Orwell was trying to show what totalitarianism is. Okay, so notice it's a government that takes total control. It is not a monarchy, though. So I want you to keep that in mind. We refer to a lot of monarchies as absolute monarchies. A totalitarian ruler would be someone who is not necessarily a monarch, though. Okay, so how do they take control? They provide a sense of security. They give direction for the future. They manipulate technology. This is really important. We saw that in 1984 with like the telescreens. They use secret police to crush opposition. So you cannot have any dissent in a totalitarian state. And they create a sense of fear among people. And if you remember the term I used monger before, there's a fear monger or a warmonger. Who remembers what those terms are?
They describe people like a warmonger is someone who constantly wants to go to war, and a fearmonger is someone who's constantly in fear.
Who's promoting fear. Yeah. So they're kind of trying to make people feel afraid, because if you're afraid, you're more likely to give up your rights to someone in order to have a sense of like control or security. Okay. So this is a quote from your book. Totalitarianism challenges the highest values prized by Western democracies: reason, freedom, human dignity, the worth of the individual. Because under a totalitarian state, you're no longer an individual. You're just like a cog in the machine, which is how Winston felt, right, in 1984, which is part of the reason why he was so depressed and like upset all the time. Okay, he had no dignity because he didn't feel that he had any worth within this state that he lived. So what methods are used by a totalitarian state in order to maintain control? And your book gave about 4 or 5 of them. You should be able to identify them and talk about a few of them. So just go ahead and not shout them out, but say them, some of the methods that they've used.
They use propaganda and censorship.
Good. Propaganda and censorship. Good. Can anybody give me a different one?
Indoctrination.
Indoctrination. Very good. What's another one?
Police terror.
Police terror. Good.
Religious/ethnic persecution.
Perfect. Religious and ethnic persecution. So those are kind of the 4 main ones that you break down. So methods that they use, you guys all named them and took notes on them. So you have this police terror, and this is a political cartoon I found, right? Size, so much paranoia, so few enemies left, because they've arrested and terrorized all of the opposition, right? So they use the police terror not only to create fear and force obedience, but also to crush any dissent. The police serve as sort of this vehicle to enforce the government policies. And we're going to see that in Russia under Stalin, and you're also going to see that in Germany under Hitler. They have their own secret police. So indoctrination is the instruction of government beliefs to mold people's minds. Where did we see this in 1984? I remember.
They're
Like the
They're-
10 seconds hate or whatever.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. The two minute, was it 2 minutes hate? Perfect. They're trying to mold people's minds. Control of education we saw with the who was his neighbor, guys? What was his neighbor's name? Parsons?
Something like that.
Yeah.
The one that he ends up going to jail because his kids rat him out. So it's this indoctrination, especially starting with young people. So you see this under Hitler with the Hitler Youth. Very similar setup they had in Russia with the youth groups who, or you saw that in the junior league that Julia is in. So basically, if you get them at a younger age, it's easier to brainwash them. So they control education, and they're able then to teach children, school children specifically, unconditional loyalty and a glorification of the government. Again, Julia really, even though she's faking it, she really represents that kind of glorification because it's all she's ever known. Okay. We also have the propaganda and censorship. So you guys already know this from your guys' excellent propaganda posters. Biased or incomplete information used to sway people to one side or another. So in order to do this, and this is really important, we'll see with Stalin, is it requires control of media, mass media, newspapers, books, films, music, everything is censored, okay? So anything that's censored means that it's been through sort of this file and there's only certain things on the shelves. A lot of libraries, even today, like even the school library probably has censorship to a certain extent, right? They're not going to put a book on there that's inappropriate or that's promoting something that is potentially dangerous or violent or, not for mature audiences only. That in itself is censorship, right? But it's censorship at the extreme in a totalitarian state where anything that even hints at a life different from the one that the government promotes is automatically bad. Okay. And there's also these methods. Remember the 2 + 2 = 5. The thing with propaganda is if you can make people believe something, even though they know it's not true. After they've seen it so many times, like after you've seen 2 + 2 = 5 so many times, it becomes part of like your mind and your thinking, which you saw is what they did with Winston when they tortured him, right? So this idea that you want to change what people even know is true to something that's not true. That's why that propaganda is used, right? So convincing people in Russia that under Stalin, life was so, so great, even though they look around and see poverty, hunger, starvation, is like, it doesn't make sense. It's not correct, but they've been basically inundated so much. Okay. Then we have the religious and ethnic persecution. So they create these enemies of the state to blame for things. And I use the term scapegoat because I want you to put that term down in your notes, because under a lot of totalitarian rulers or dictators, they find some sort of a scapegoat. Who are we going to blame for the things that go wrong? Who remembers in the Ottoman Empire the scapegoats were?
The Armenians.
The Armenians. That's why they, exactly, very good. They carried out the ethnic cleansing, the genocide against them. They said, oh, we lost all of these battles because the Armenians are terrible fighters and they sabotaged us. We need to wipe them out. Totally false. It was totally false, but they found a group of a certain ethnic group that they didn't like because remember they were Christian. And so they target them. In Germany, you guys know that the scapegoat were obviously the Jewish people, but they also added other people into that, right? Gypsies, Polish people, certain members of Slavic ethnic groups. Based on your reading, has anybody figured out who kind of the scapegoats were in Russia?
I think the textbook mentioned the Jews again.
Good. So I mentioned to you guys too, the very famous musical was Fiddler on the Roof, which is a story of Russian Jews who are actually forced to leave Russia, and they go, unfortunately, they go to Germany. Some of them go to the United States, but this was all before World War II, obviously. Good. So they use Jewish people. Actually, in Russia, they're going to target any religious group. Okay. So the Russian state under Stalin is inherently atheist and does not want any religion at all. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. But he basically targets any religious group, okay? And so right there is kind of are the methods of totalitarianism. So in your guys' opinion, which one serves to give the state the most long-term control?
Indoctrination.
Indoctrination, good. I think that too. Why? There's no right answer to this, though. But why do you think indoctrination?
Because it controls like the education and the youth and brings them up to love the government.
Right. It's an entire generation or generations that are completely subservient to the government. I actually agree that indoctrination, I think, is probably the most dramatic, because propaganda even can change, right? Like every year, right? The methods that you use to convince people of things that are wrong or right or good or bad. But indoctrination, if you get into somebody's head, right, which you saw with 1984, let's control exactly what Winston thinks. We control thought, and then we control the world. Okay, so there's no right answer to this, but just think about that and be able to kind of explain those methods. Again, always think about 1984. All of them are present in there. So now you guys should be on number 5 or on the next page of your guys' guided notes that you can start to add to. If you want to go back and reread the PDF, you're more than welcome to. It's not very long, but this is where kind of it starts talking about totalitarianism in Russia under Stalin. So this is a propaganda poster that Stalin actually had made. Notice the metaphor, right? He's this captain steering the ship to safety. He's strong. He is in control. He's providing a sense of direction, right? All of those things that a totalitarian ruler wants to basically imitate. Okay. So he builds a totalitarian state by eliminating individual rights in favor of the state. And this is a really important thing. If you guys know the less than or greater than signs for math, under a totalitarian state, if you want to write this, totalitarianism is order and security is greater than individual rights and freedom. Okay, so order and security is greater than individual rights and freedom. So you basically give up those rights in favor of a powerful state that establishes order. So he builds a police state. And if you guys remember, we've talked about the reign of terror and the great fear that swept the countryside. This is different. So under Stalin, he uses his police to prevent the rise of opposition. Now, Remember, Stalin is a successor to Lenin. Does anybody remember who his kind of political rival was? The name of Stalin's political rival?
Trotsky.
Trotsky. Good. There's a guy, Leon Trotsky. Remember, he led the Red Army. He was a very like charismatic, outgoing, excellent organizer, whereas Stalin was kind of more cold and reserved. And he eliminates him. He basically exiles him from Russia. The Great Purge is where he basically, this is where Stalin goes back and says, anybody who could potentially threaten my power, I need to get rid of. And so who are you going to target? You're going to target people from your own party. So he turns on all these Bolsheviks who actually helped Lenin and him in the revolution. And he basically accuses them of a bunch of crimes against the Soviet state. Some of them are executed after they're put on trial. Some of them are exiled to Siberia, which again is where we saw in Between Shades of Grey, where Lena's family is exiled to. So the Great Purge is this campaign of terror directed not necessarily at opposition, because they were all Bolsheviks, but just basically anybody who threatened his power. Okay. And he turns on his own people until basically by 1928 or 1930, there's nobody who could stand in Stalin's way. There's no other political rival who could potentially take control. And yeah, that's very, very significant, because you need to not have any opposition if you're going to be a totalitarian ruler. It also shows that he's, turning against his own people. He controls all sorts of information, just like we said, strict censorship, no individual creativity. If you look at propaganda posters from Russia, they basically all look at the one on the left. Art is used to glorify the Communist Party. Okay, so what can we do? And Stalin actually paints himself as this kind of hero of the people. He comes from a really poor area of Russia called Georgia, which is its own country at this point. Kind of comes from poverty and paints this idea that he is the savior, that he understands the people better than anybody else. And you see here, again, another propaganda poster. Stalin, here he's the captain of a ship. Here he's this like fatherly figure who's holding up these little babies, and he's so gentle and he's so loving, and he's caring about them. I think it's really interesting for those of you who like to look at the art. Notice that the little kid is blonde and blue haired, or blonde hair, blue eyes, which again is this kind of ideal in Europe that we see Hitler is gonna cling to as well. But under him, the school children learn the virtues of the Communist Party. So just like in 1984, the Communist Party writes their own version of history. So what recent history are they maybe going to rewrite and teach the school children?
World War One.
World War I, right? Remember how humiliated the Russians were by how they were in World War I? They're going to rewrite that, and they're going to make it so that the Russians don't look so bad in that. Good. Anybody have any other ones that they remember?
The thing, I forget what it was called, where a bunch of like families and workers marched to the palace.
Good. Yep, good. Bloody Sunday. So they have Bloody Sunday where they went there. They're going to rewrite that, right? Probably though in favor of the people and not in favor of the czar and his generals or in the military who fired on them. But basically, just like we see in 1984, remember, Winston's job is to basically go back and rewrite the news, rewrite the history books. And that's what the party does. So again, Orwell is clinging to this idea and basically saying, can you believe they did this? This is really important too, I think. Under the Communist Party, they stress the importance of sacrifice and hard work. If you can convince people that everything they are doing is for the good of the communist state, is in order to make our nation better, then they'll do a lot. They'll do basically anything. They'll give up so much. It's like you're living in poverty. You don't have a lot of like the luxuries of other European countries, but it's okay because it's part of the sacrifice. This is what we have to do. And they kind of, again, indoctrinate these children, these people to think this is the way it's supposed to be and this is good. So again, you're kind of like, no, I'm hungry and my clothes are old and the house that we live in is, dirty and dilapidated, but you're telling me that this is how it's supposed to be. So again, it's all about that indoctrination. This is also really important that under communism, so Marx describes religion, this is a quote, as the opium of the masses, right? So remember, opium is a drug, very strong drug, that basically he's saying religion is just used to sedate or to control people. That's what Marx would say. So communists historically have kind of clung to that idea and said, yes, actually, these religious institutions have always been tied to centers of power, to the monarchy, and they've been oppressive. So we need to basically overthrow them. So in doing that, they basically eliminate people's freedom of religion and expression and relationship with any god or any religious institution. And so he forms the League of the Militant Godless. So it's basically an atheist group. And it's this big political, group that everybody joins. And they basically say, if you're militant, that means that you're actually fighting. You want to eliminate or fight against any form of religion. And so this atheist group was basically replacing religious teachings with the ideals of communism. It's important to note, and I want you to put a note with this, the League of the Militant Godless said that instead of religion, what are we going to rely on? What do you guys think? What are they going to reject religion in favor of?
Militarism?
No, that's a good guess. Science, actually. So they do turn to science. Now, this is the early 1900s. So how much science are they going to have access to? But they basically set up actually these museums where they're disproving all of these superstitions, where they're basically putting all these religious relics and saying, this is obviously fake because, and they're using science to disprove it. Unfortunately, rather than finding kind of the balance and the harmony between religion and science, they just try to eliminate religion in favor of science. And they're going through, I remember I told you guys that part of the reason Rasputin even rose to a lot of power was because there's a lot of superstition that was prevalent at the time that made someone like him able to convince people that he had some truth to what he said. So he also, Stalin also attacks the Russian Orthodox Church. For those of you who studied church history, the Orthodox Church is the closest church to the Catholic Church. So it's basically just what's known as the Eastern Rite. It's an Eastern church, but very similar setup to the Catholic Church. Stalin goes through and attacks them, right? So attacks the bishops, attacks the church hierarchy, trying to get rid of this kind of religious hold in the Soviet Union. And to a large extent, he's pretty successful, unfortunately, even going to, like I said, expelling the Russian Jews from the Soviet Union. So going on to the next one, and I'll take questions at the end for us to clarify. So that's kind of on like the social level. On the economic level, so someone remind me, in communism, economically, what's the main idea or main ideas?
Instead of having like private kind of property, everything is owned publicly rather than...
Perfect. And communism is anti what economic system?
Capitalism.
Capitalism, right? So it's anti-capitalism, basically saying we don't work for a profit. We work and then we distribute that wealth amongst everybody. The thing that's really interesting, if you remember under Lenin, with Lenin's new economic plan, it was actually capitalist in nature. Okay, it was basically saying we need to have some private enterprise because our economy is shot. We just finished the war. We need to build it up. So we're going to stay capitalist for a little bit. Under Stalin, the command economy, if you see here, he sets up something called the command economy. The government makes all economic decisions and basically takes and redistributes all of the profit. So there's still profit and there's still production, but the government is now in control of it. Okay, so under this command economy, Stalin and his party identify what the country needs and basically says, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an example of something that's happening right now, that with the lack of medical supplies, for example, under the coronavirus, the president and the administration have said, we might ask or tell factories, we need you to produce face masks and, hand sanitizer because we don't have enough. That's an example of the political leaders saying, we have a dire economic need, something desperate, and we are going to tell you what to produce. That is only because we are in literally a declared state of national emergency. Under Stalin, that was every single day. Okay, that's basically Stalin saying every day, this is what we need and this is what you're going to make. So he created these 5-year plans, and he basically said, in order for us to compete economically with the rest of the world, we're going to limit the production of consumer goods. So consumer goods are things like food, clothing, household supplies. Okay, we're going to limit those so that we can make other things like steel. Right. So these huge factories that are producing all of the, oil, that are refining things like that, those are growing, and the economy grows because they're producing and selling those. But the people don't have enough food and don't have enough clothing and don't have enough basically personal supplies. So notice that there's that trade-off there, that yes, the 5-year plans helped the economy, but at the expense of the people. Where else in history recently have we seen this happen? Yeah, a lot of you guys wrote about it in your papers.
In Africa?
Good. In Africa, what did they produce?
They were producing different factory goods, but they weren't doing farming like cash crops.
Perfect. They were producing the cash crops, which, remember, you can't eat. You can't eat tobacco. You can't eat cotton. So they're growing these to be able to send to the factories, but then people don't have like corn and potatoes and lettuce to eat every single day. And so that's exactly what I was thinking of, Julia, that it's kind of this trade-off where, yeah, you're helping the economy grow, but at the expense of the people. Okay. Again, though, if you've indoctrinated the people to say this sacrifice is all for the good of the communist state, people are going to buy into it. Okay. So that's the command economy side. That's the factory side. Then there's also the agricultural side. So under Stalin, he basically says we need to have an agricultural revolution. We're going to create collective farms. Okay. So he basically goes into these private farms or these areas where people have little farms, and he says, this entire area, we are now going to make into one big, huge government owned. But remember, the government is the people. Okay. Government owned farm where you're still going to work on it, but your family, what they produce is going to go to the state. We'll give you how much you need to eat. But basically, they created these huge farms that people were forced to work on. These peasants were forced to work on. Luckily for them at this time, there's modern machinery. We've gone through not only the agricultural revolution, but the industrial revolution. So there's these machineries. It reduced workers that could then be put in other places. And it made these huge collective farms that produce a lot of food for the state. But in taking over these people's basically land, they end up killing, there's an estimate between 5 and 10 million peasants who resist and who basically say, wait, we don't want to give up our land. And they say, well, no, we're a communist state now. You have to. Everything is public. And if you look over on the side, in Ukraine, which at this point is one of the Soviet republics, part of the USSR, it's an independent country today. They fiercely resisted. The kulaks are this group of kind of wealthier peasants, which sounds like an oxymoron, sounds like a contradiction, but they owned kind of larger sized farms. And Stalin basically says we need to liquidate them, wipe them out. If they're resisting this, then just take them. And if you look on the side, more than 3 million Ukrainians were shot, exiled, or imprisoned. And some 6 million people died in a government-engineered famine. So basically, they said, we'll just starve them out. Again, that's an example of ethnic cleansing, in that it's not a straight genocide where they take them, to the concentration camps, like with the Jewish people, and then eliminate them. But they basically starve them so that they're gone. They don't want that ethnic group anymore. And so if you see by 1935, that kulaks no longer exist. They're no longer a viable ethnic group. So what system does this remind you of? This kind of taking over the farms and saying, this is where you will work and you will give us everything that you make and we will give you a little bit. Go all the way back, really back far.
Serfdom.
Who said it? I think someone said it.
Serfdom.
Serfdom, which if you remember, that was in Russia for a really long time. You remember Catherine the Great did not abolish serfdom. In fact, when the serfs tried to rise up, she sent the army in and slaughtered them. So it reminds a lot of serfdom. Exactly. It's almost like Russia's going backwards, or a little bit like kind of like feudalism, except you don't have the nobility, right? But definitely like these people are converted back into serfs at the time. So these are the two kind of economic changes that you should be familiar with that Stalin makes. Again, the command economy. So government takes control of the factories and all economic decisions. Yes, there is a huge increase in the Soviet economy, but at the expense of people's, livelihood. And then the collective farms, again, these huge government-owned farms where people are forced to work and produce food. So if you guys look here, this is kind of the buildup of the Soviet economy for 10 years under Stalin. Notice that this is when Stalin takes control, and this is just before World War II starts. So notice in industry, huge increase in coal because he's got all these mines. Significant increase in steel production. At the time, who is his biggest competitor in steel production? I want to take a guess. The U.S. Very good. If you guys know Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie is a Scottish immigrant who came to the United States and set up Carnegie Steel, which was hugely successful. The Soviets were basically like, we need to compete with them. Okay. Over here, livestock. Notice that there's a drop in livestock and then an increase again in livestock. And then over here, we have this kind of increase in agriculture and wheat production. Okay. So again, they kind of show you that over time, over these 10 years, the Soviet economy does expand like very, very significantly. Okay. Some important things to keep in mind. So we talked kind of socially, religiously under Stalin, economically just now under Stalin, and then sort of the daily life under Stalin. Rights of women are greatly expanded, okay, for a couple different reasons. One, under the Communist Party, part of the reason why they got a lot of support was actually because men and women are declared equal and granted equal rights. Lenin did that when he seized power, okay? Women play a role in the labor force. They're given jobs. It's no longer just stay at home. There are some educational opportunities that are opened to women to become professionals. Okay. And you're going to see for everybody, there's some more educational opportunities. And motherhood, however, is still, think about 1984, think about Winston's first wife, I think her name was Catherine, and even Julia, that motherhood is this kind of patriotic duty. You need to produce children that you then raise to be good communist members, new good party members. And so it's seen as kind of this act of patriotism, not like this loving, caring, like, I want to have a family act, but no, like you need to basically produce citizens to keep this communist state going. Part of just about a couple weeks ago, we celebrated International Women's Day. The origins of that are kind of contested. Some people argue it started in France. Some people argue it started in the US. A very big portion of people actually say it started in Russia under Lenin, because women were given all of these rights, right? Women were declared equal under Lenin. And so Russian people still celebrate International Women's Day pretty extensively. Mrs. Timms usually brings in like a carnation or a flower to give to all of the female teachers because in Russia, it's something very celebrated. So they're very proud of that kind of equality that they sort of exemplify. So that's under women. So the rights of women do expand. I want you to still keep in mind, though, that they're still seen as like motherhood is kind of their main. You should get married and have children, right? Like you should be, you can work and you can go to school, but you still need to be a mother at the same time, which ends up causing like this very difficult, like, while I'm working or while I'm a professional, but at the same time, I have to raise my children, you know what I mean? So that's tough. Then also under Stalin, this educational opportunities expand. During the Bolshevik Revolution, this is important to note, a lot of these skilled workers, so professionals and people who have like a trade, skilled workers, they fled. They went to other parts of Europe to escape the revolution, to escape, all of the violence and turmoil. And so Stalin basically says we need to expand educational opportunities. So they provide universities and technical training. And the only way to not be this peasant or quote unquote serf working out on the collective farms was to go to university, right? To get an education. So actually under Stalin, there's an increase in education and literacy rates, which you're actually going to see this. If the totalitarian government is in favor of education for people, they tend to have literacy go up because they're in control of everything. You have no choice but to go to school and learn to read. Okay, so there are some benefits. Please make a note. This is not Western classical or public education like we have in the United States or in other parts of Europe. All right, there still is inequality in this. There still is sort of this hierarchy, even though educational opportunities are expanding. Okay, so it's not public education at this point. And then also just, again, total loss of individual rights, creativity, and expression. So in order to maintain control, Stalin needed total obedience and conformity by all people. So even though you're going to university, you're not writing a paper analyzing, the strengths and weaknesses of communism, right? You're writing a paper glorifying the communist state at the time. So that's kind of where we are. And then here's just a map of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Remember, the Soviets were those kind of like little government republics that were set up pre-revolution that Lenin basically kind of organized and then used to lead the revolution, the March Revolution. So looking over here, these are some places that they've added on. If you guys remember here's Lithuania. This is from Between Shades of Grey when Stalin invades and takes over Lena's family and home and, whatever, moves them towards into Siberia, into those work camps. Okay. Good. Oh yeah, we'll do China next. So any questions about anything that we've covered or anywhere you would like me to go back and review just a little bit more?
Can you go back to the slide about propaganda and censorship in Russia?
Sure. Yes. This one?
Yes.
Okay. Yep, for sure. So again, if you look up a lot of these propaganda posters, a lot of them are in black and white, but then use red because you remember red is the color of the communists. It was the Red Army that fought against the White Army in the Civil War. So they use that red a lot, again, as sort of a important color. Any other questions or things you want me to clarify? Any terms? Any question at all? Or just a comment that you want to make that you find interesting?
So in Between Shades of Grey, when they would take away all the educated men and stuff, is that because they were educated not necessarily what they would learn?
Yep.
They were educated, it wasn't censored as much as what they wanted, so that's why.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, that's a great question, Lily, and actually something I wanted to even bring up with the Armenian genocide. If you remember in the Armenian genocide, they wipe out the soldiers, and at the same time, they go into the towns, if you remember from the documentary, and they seize all of the intellectuals, the professors, the politicians, the learned people. Because like Lily just said, they were intellectual. They thought for themselves. The whole idea of being intellectual is that you use your intellect. You think and you reason and you rationalize and you criticize a lot of times, right? Because you disagree with things, which is why a lot of times universities are centers for debate and discussion about politics and economics and art and the world and history, because you're basically thinking. So yes, her father was a professor. He was going to question. He was more well-educated. If you are well-educated, you're probably going to question when you see certain things where you're like, wait, Stalin's the savior? No, Stalin's not the savior. He did this. Or wait, you're changing that in history? No. I studied history. I teach history. That's not correct. So yes, almost always under totalitarian regimes, they go after this educated intellectual class of people, because that is going to be the first group of people to oppose any of these kind of measures that the totalitarian state is taking, right? The smarter and the more educated you are, the more likely you are to question things. And under totalitarianism, we do not want you to question anything. Exactly. They were educated intellectuals in the old system of education, right? Not in the new indoctrination. Very good. That's a great question. Good. Any other questions about sort of that? What's happening? I'll go back to this one in case you guys need any more of the economic ones. Hopefully you guys got that. If you would like to go back and reread this part of your PDF, it's just section 2 of the PDF. What I'm going to ask you guys to do, actually, we finished the notes, so you don't actually have any homework to do if you were in this call, because you got everything. If you would like to go back and reread the PDF, though, section 2 about Stalin, it's basically just this information, but written in the PDF. So you can skim that, or if you want to work ahead, this is not due until, I believe, Wednesday when we meet again. We're going to look at the rise of totalitarianism in China. So Chinese history is very complicated. We are not going to go into the details because it is just, Mrs. Drum actually has her master's in it. If you ever want to sit down and talk to a very smart, well-educated person, she's excellent. But we're going to kind of give the basics leading up to World War II. Okay. So if you want to work ahead, if you have time today, or wait till tomorrow, whatever. We do not have a live session tomorrow, but we will be available for office hours between 8 and 9. I think that's what it says on the sheet. If you look at the sheet, we'll be available if you want to call in, and we'll post a Google Meet there if you want to do that and just talk or ask questions about anything. If you look ahead at the schedule, next Monday, so a week from today, there will be a short Google form quiz over Russia and China, which is basically all we're doing this week is Russia and China. So just look ahead. That will be next Monday, but again, it's a week away, and it'll just be a straightforward, just like our regular quizzes on a Google form. Okay. Any other questions? Things you want to share? Did anybody ask any questions in the sidebar? I haven't had a chance to look at it while I was presenting. No?
Do we have, so that's all the homework we have tonight?
Yeah, actually, we finished your homework. So your homework was to finish the Russian notes. And we just did them all. I didn't know if we'd have time, but we did. That was great. So if you want to go back and rewatch the video, I'll upload this as soon as it downloads on my computer. But you can go back and rewatch that if you want to add anything to it. But other than that, if you want to read the PDF over Russia, you can. If you want to work ahead on China, you can. But other than that, we are good to go, guys. Oh, you can read Animal Farm. Just go read Animal Farm and get that done too. Okay.
So
No, Andy?
Is there any way
What's
to
that?
turn in our thing? The guided notes?
You do not need to turn them in. Nope.
All right.
Good question. Those are all just for you guys to have. And if I do a homework check, like if I maybe do a homework check over China, hint, hint, on Wednesday, it would just be open notes. So if you would just have those done.
Okay.
Andrew, you don't need to turn in the homework. So you don't need to turn in these guided notes. Guided notes are for you guys. Just have them again if you would have a homework check, or if I would give you a Google form to say, hey, did you read this? This is important. And then I think later in the week, I can't remember which day, I was going to post a video. I think Wednesday we're going to talk about Animal Farm instead. And so I would post a video going over the China stuff too. Okay. Good. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. It was so good to see you guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Adios.
Oh, I'm gonna stop and. Okay.